At the Christmas dinner table, my grandfather slammed his hand down hard. Why is a complete stranger in control of the multi-million-dollar cold storage and logistics company I bought for my granddaughter, Tabitha Lyons, froze the fork with a piece of turkey halfway to my mouth. His words hit like a thunderclap, silencing the entire room in an instant. The table had been lively just seconds before laughter, clinking glasses, the smell of roasted turkey and gingerbread cookies filling the air. My grandfather, Sidney, had just returned from a long business trip and was sitting at the head of the table. Then, out of nowhere, his palm crashed against the wood, making every wine glass tremble. He stared straight across the table, his voice low but sharp as a knife. Why is a stranger running the cold storage and logistics company in Texas that I purchased and put in Tabitha's name 4 years ago? I slowly lowered my fork, letting my eyes widen in what looked like total shock. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice shaky and confused. "Grandpa, what are you talking about? I don't even have a single dollar in my own name. How could I possibly own a company?" The silence that followed was suffocating. My dad's knuckles turned white around the carving knife. My mom's face drained of color. My younger brother and his wife exchanged a quick, nervous glance. No one dared to speak. Grandpa leaned forward slightly. He explained calmly that a few weeks earlier, an old business partner had called him by mistake, thinking he was still involved. The partner congratulated him on the new owner, a man named David Carter, who was now fully in charge of the company. I kept the stunned expression on my face, asking softly, "David Carter? I've never even heard that name before." Inside, everything was racing, but I stayed quiet, watching their reactions, waiting for what would come next. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. And then the police showed up. Have you ever been betrayed by the people closest to you, the ones you thought would always have your back? Drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one and really want to know where you're from and what you've been through. And if you want to find out what happens next, don't forget to like the video and turn on notifications so you don't miss the rest. See you in part 2. The entire family was still frozen in shock from Grandpa's question. My grandfather, Sidney, reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of tax documents that the business partner had mistakenly emailed him. He slid them across the table, pointing directly at the line showing David Carter as the current primary owner of the cold storage and logistics company in Texas. My younger brother, Knox, immediately leaned forward, his face flushing as he scanned the papers quickly. He shook his head and insisted it had to be some kind of mix-up, maybe another company with a similar name in a different part of the state. His voice came out higher than usual, almost forced casual. Mom Yvonne jumped in right after, placing her hand gently on Grandpa's arm. She suggested he must be exhausted from the time zone changes and the long flight back, saying memories could get fuzzy after such trips. She smiled too widely, trying to steer the conversation away. Dad Barry nodded along with her, carving another slice of turkey, even though no one was eating anymore. He agreed that tonight was Christmas, a time for family and celebration, not business talk that could wait until everyone was rested. I sat there, letting the confusion play across my face, as if this was all brand new to me. My mind raced, but I kept my tone soft and bewildered when I finally spoke up again. I told them how the past 4 years had been nothing but struggle after college graduation, scraping by in a cramped, rundown apartment on the outskirts of Houston, where the walls were thin and the AC barely worked in the brutal Texas summers. There were months when instant noodles were the main meal, stretched out with whatever cheap vegetables I could find at the discount store. One Christmas stands out in particular. I'd just been paid from a temp job, but after rent and bills, all I could afford for myself was a small box of off-brand cookies from the dollar store wrapped in leftover newspaper, because I didn't have gift paper. I looked around the table and asked quietly why no one had ever mentioned this company to me if it was really in my name. My voice cracked just enough to sell the hurt and surprise. Grandpa Sidney picked up from there, explaining more about the mistaken call. The partner had assumed he was still overseeing things, and mentioned how well David Carter was expanding the warehouse facilities and securing new contracts for frozen goods transport across the state. Knox shifted in his chair, muttering something about how emails and calls could get crossed wires all the time in business. Tegan stayed unusually quiet beside him, focusing on pushing food around her plate. Mom kept glancing at Dad, who cleared his throat and suggested we all have some dessert to lighten the mood. I pressed a little more, asking Grandpa if the partner had said anything else specific about the ownership change. He recounted the conversation in more detail, the partner describing recent upgrades to the refrigeration units and new trucking routes that were boosting profits significantly. Each word seemed to make the air heavier, the festive lights on the tree suddenly feeling mocking against the growing strain. Dad tried changing the subject again, talking about how good the pie smelled, but his words fell flat. Knox avoided eye contact, staring at the documents like they might disappear if he willed it hard enough. Mom's hand trembled slightly as she poured more water into glasses no one was drinking from. I leaned back, folding my arms to hide how steady I was keeping them on purpose. The denials were piling up, vague excuses layering over each other without any real explanation. Grandpa didn't push too hard, yet just let the papers sit there as evidence no one could fully dismiss. The room stayed tense, everyone waiting for someone else to break the awkward standoff. Forks scraped plates occasionally, but no one was really eating. I could sense them scrambling internally for better ways to deflect their discomfort, growing with every passing second of silence. Grandpa still refused to drop the subject. Dad let out a long sigh, the kind he used when trying to sound reasonable during arguments. He carefully placed the carving knife beside his plate, the metal ringing softly against the china. Then he looked around at everyone, his expression a mix of concern and patience. He started by recalling how 4 years earlier, right after I graduated, Grandpa had generously placed the entire cold storage and logistics company, an established operation with warehouses outside Dallas and contracts across Texas, in my name, as a gift for my future. But at that time, he said I was only 22, fresh out of school, with no real-world business experience. Running something that size could have overwhelmed me, leading to costly errors or even loss of the whole asset. The family, he explained, had simply agreed to step in and handle day-to-day operations, temporarily shielding me from risks until I was better prepared. Mom picked up seamlessly, her voice warm but firm. She described their fear that unscrupulous partners might exploit my inexperience, or that poor decisions could drive the company into financial trouble, potentially bankruptcy. All they wanted, she insisted, was to safeguard Grandpa's thoughtful investment for my long-term benefit. Knox nodded vigorously from across the table, backing them up. He called it a collective family choice, purely protective. No one wanted to see me struggle with such heavy responsibility so early in life. Tegan sat quietly next to him, her fork idle gaze lowered to avoid the growing tension. I allowed the pain to surface on my face, brows furrowing as if processing betrayal for the first time. Leaning forward, I asked in a voice thick with emotion what temporary management actually entailed. Had they made decisions without my input? Why exclude me entirely if the intent was protection? Dad reassured me it involved only routine oversight, maintaining contracts, paying vendors, keeping profits reinvested. Nothing permanent, he stressed, and control would transfer back whenever I felt equipped to take over. Mom echoed that they avoided involving me to prevent added stress during my adjustment to independence. Knox added they monitored performance closely, ensuring steady growth without unnecessary complications. Grandpa interrupted calmly, shaking his head. He gestured to the documents again, noting the filings indicated complete ownership shift, not provisional guardianship or trust arrangement. Dad's forehead creased. He suggested possible administrative updates for tax purposes that didn't alter underlying family control. Mom agreed, mentioning how LLC structures sometimes required formal adjustments for liability reasons. I questioned softly how those adjustments ended with David Carter listed as primary owner if everything remained family-held. My tone carried hurt confusion, eyes glistening to heighten the effect. Knox dismissed it as likely clerical error from state records common in Texas filings when multiple members existed. Tegan finally shifted but stayed silent, fingers twisting her napkin. Mom deflected further by emphasizing their ongoing vigilance over operations, promising full transparency soon. Dad nodded, proposing discussion after holidays when emotions ran lower. Grandpa countered quietly that official records showed outright transfer, not shared membership or proxy. Sweat glistened on Dad's temple. Mom's reassuring smile wavered. Knox rubbed his neck uncomfortably. Excuses overlapped technicalities, misunderstandings, protective measures, all avoiding direct admission of sale. I observed every twitch, every averted glance, the way voices rose slightly in defense. The festive atmosphere evaporated completely, replaced by strained politeness masking deeper unease. Plates remained largely untouched. Conversation circled defensively, rationales growing thinner, yet more insistent. No one conceded ground, clinging to vague assurances of temporary intent and future handover. The tree lights continued blinking, casting colored shadows across worried faces. Tension built steadily, denials holding the line, but fraying at edges under persistent scrutiny. Grandpa had just finished pointing out the ownership transfer. He fixed his stare on Knox, the question hanging heavy. Grandpa asked directly whether my brother recalled signing any paperwork connected to the company during the past few years. Knox blinked several times, setting his glass down harder than necessary. He admitted he had put his name on a couple of limited power of attorney papers when Mom and Dad asked, insisting they were minor authorizations needed for everyday decisions while I established myself. Grandpa remained silent for a beat, then reached for his phone. He made a short call instructing someone to come inside immediately. The door swung open soon after. Mr. Hodges walked in confidently, briefcase in hand. Grandpa's trusted lawyer placed it firmly on the table, snapping the latches open to reveal organized folders. He began with the primary document in question, an older authorization form bearing what appeared to be my signature. Mr. Hodges highlighted the date first, noting it aligned suspiciously with a time when travel records placed me hours away in Austin for interviews. Enlarged images followed. The loops and angles differed subtly from verified examples, pressure lighter in certain strokes, slant inconsistent in others. Enough variation to question authenticity without declaring outright mismatch. Printer forensics came next. Invisible yellow dots embedded by most office machines revealed the document emerged from a device months later than claimed, undermining the recorded execution timeline. Dad suggested replacement copies often carried new print dates for archival purposes in Texas filings. Mom supported that, mentioning how common reissues were after initial submissions. Knox pointed fingers at the notary service. Arguing staff frequently reprinted lost originals and applied incorrect dates during busy periods. Tegan finally contributed, proposing simple administrative oversight. Backlogs at state agencies led to routine corrections that altered metadata unintentionally. I kept bewilderment etched on my features, inquiring innocently what those technical details implied for actual control of the warehouses and contracts. My prompts drew extended clarifications, exposing more gaps. Grandpa interjected, occasionally pressing for specifics on authorization scope. Mr. Hodges outlined Texas statutes limiting proxies to stated purposes, noting overreach could invite scrutiny. Responses overlapped defensively. Dad emphasized intent always remained protective. Mom stressed avoidance of burden on my early career. Knox reiterated the forms enabled only operational continuity, nothing transferring permanent rights. Tegan nodded, adding such arrangements protected family assets broadly. I followed up gently, wondering why proxies proved necessary if oversight stayed temporary. The inquiry prompted hurried justifications about efficiency during growth phases. Mr. Hodges displayed side-by-side comparisons against bank signature cards from my accounts. Discrepancies persisted. Baseline tilt variance connection breaks uncommon in my genuine writing. No definitive forgery conclusion emerged, only accumulated red flags demanding resolution. The attorney stressed further expert review could clarify intent. Faces around the table tightened. Dad loosened his collar slightly. Mom sipped water repeatedly. Knox drummed fingers quietly. Tegan recommended obtaining notary logs for verification. Knox seized on that, claiming it would resolve everything swiftly. I expressed quiet concern over why such steps felt required, now voice laced with apparent hurt. Reactions intensified, reassurances flowing faster, less coordinated. Grandpa observed calmly, allowing the doubts to settle. Evidence hovered at suspicion level, planting seeds without full accusation. Holiday decorations contrasted sharply with mounting unease. Defenses held, but cracks widened under examination. The room grew quieter, everyone processing implications of the pointed irregularities. Mr. Hodges shifted smoothly to the next set of materials. He laid out a series of enlarged printouts, each displaying an anonymous email sent to recruiters at companies where I had applied for entry-level logistics or management roles straight out of college. The messages varied slightly in wording, but followed a pattern suggesting I demonstrated poor work ethic, often abandoned responsibilities mid-project, or created unnecessary drama in team settings that made me unsuitable for professional environments. The attorney pointed to headers revealing sender domains routed through temporary accounts, yet server logs consistently traced initiation back to the residential IP registered to this very address. Knox reacted instantly, twisting in his seat to face Mom directly. His tone carried sharp frustration as he asked why she had insisted he compose those notes, framing them as necessary intervention to discourage positions too demanding or located too far away. Tegan's eyes widened. She leaned forward, voice pitched higher than usual, reminding Knox that he had specifically asked her to review outgoing company mail and stumbled upon drafts saved in his personal folder. She maintained her discovery stayed accidental, refusing to accept shared responsibility for content she never approved. Dad extended both palms in a placating gesture, attempting to lower the volume. He reminded everyone the original motivation centered on steering my early career towards stable local opportunities where family could offer guidance if challenges arose. Mom's composure cracked further. Moisture gathered in her eyes as she explained the constant worry over distance, those communications intended only to eliminate options that might strand me in unfamiliar cities without support network. Knox countered quickly, arguing her anxiety translated into actions he felt pressured to take, even when uncomfortable. He claimed reluctance throughout but yielded to persistent parental concern. Tegan challenged that narrative, recalling conversations where Knox expressed confidence the approach would ultimately benefit everyone by keeping me closer long-term. I stayed motionless, absorbing every nuance, the way voices overlapped in defense gestures, growing more animated, faces flushing with a mix of defensiveness and regret. Occasional prompts from me, phrased as confused questions about particular rejected applications, elicited more detailed recollections, widening the exposed coordination. Dad's moderating attempts weakened. His calls for understanding the context of protective intent landed flatly against mounting accusations. Mom wiped at tears now flowing freely, repeating variations on wanting proximity and security for her daughter above all else. Knox dismissed those repetitions as excuses masking excessive control. He shifted blame toward parental initiative while minimizing his execution role. Tegan distanced herself further, emphasizing surprise upon learning full scope through later discoveries. She expressed disappointment in Knox for not disclosing sooner. Grandpa watched impassively. Mr. Hodges arranged timestamps chronologically, illustrating pattern consistency over multiple hiring cycles. Responses fragmented. Knox conceded composition but downplayed influence. Mom acknowledged input yet reframed as gentle suggestion. Tegan highlighted instances where messages aligned with periods. Knox managed correspondence independently. Internal recriminations dominated discussion. Each participant guarded personal liability while highlighting others' greater involvement. I interjected minimally inquiries, drawing out additional timeline specifics without revealing prior knowledge. The lawyer's methodical presentation amplified divisions naturally. Log entries correlated precisely with household online activity during typical evening hours. Knox admitted drafting under guidance. Mom insisted on misinterpreted concern. Tegan stressed limited awareness. Dad appealed repeatedly for perspective on difficult circumstances, prompting decisions, though conviction faded. I noted quietly how certain rejections coincided with key career milestones. Answers arrived, hurried justifications tangling further. Tension coiled tighter. Alliances strained visibly under weight of mutual exposure. Grandpa remained observer. Exhibits rested displayed silent testimony to orchestrated interference. Voices tapered eventually, exhaustion overtaking defensiveness. Unresolved resentment lingered heavily. No admission touched the sale itself. Focus stayed locked on career sabotage rationales. The divide deepened palpably, fractures permanent beneath surface reconciliation attempts. Ditch Grandpa raised his hand palm out, demanding silence amid the escalating argument. The bickering stopped abruptly, every head swiveling toward him. His eyes carried an icy determination I had rarely seen even during tough business negotiations he used to describe from his younger days. He drew a slow breath before speaking, voice steady and devoid of warmth. He revealed that several months earlier, after initial suspicions arose from irregular reports, he had consulted professionals and updated his last will and testament. The new document revoked all previous provisions benefiting Dad, Mom Knox or Tegan, redirecting the entirety of remaining assets, including properties, investments, and trusts, exclusively to me as sole heir. Mr. Hodges confirmed quietly, sliding the certified copy across for viewing. Notarized seals and witness signatures gleamed under the dining room light. The attorney then transitioned seamlessly to the concluding evidence. He displayed enlarged forensic comparisons of the contract signature transferring the cold storage and logistics company to David Carter. Side-by-side overlays highlighted identical idiosyncrasies, specific curl in certain letters, consistent pen lift points, and pressure distribution patterns that matched Knox's authenticated samples with 99% certainty. Financial records followed immediately. Detailed statements traced substantial wire transfers from the purchaser into a long-held joint account controlled by my parents, categorized explicitly as payment for business asset sale. Knox's resistance crumbled visibly. Shoulders slumping, he finally confessed the full scheme. They orchestrated the outright sale to generate urgent capital, staving off imminent foreclosure on Dad's struggling construction company that faced crippling supplier liens and bank demands. Tegan's involvement emerged in his explanation. She had leveraged industry connections to identify David Carter as a discreet buyer, capable of closing rapidly without extensive due diligence. Mom let out a choked sound, pressing fingers to her lips. Dad gripped the table edge, knuckles whitening further. Tegan's tears began flowing freely, protests tumbling out that her role stayed limited to introduction, never extending to document preparation. Grandpa responded without raising volume, emphasizing the coordinated deception spanned years, interfering with my independence while exploiting the gift intended solely for my security. Mr. Hodges outlined applicable Texas statutes. Calmly, forgery of instruments affecting property rights carried serious penalties compounded by potential fraud charges when misrepresentation induced transfer. A deliberate knock resonated from the entrance. Grandpa nodded permission. Two officers in uniform stepped inside, badges visible, demeanor professional, yet firm. They explained arrival stemmed from prior filing of suspected document fraud complaint, supported by preliminary expert findings. One began photographing exhibits with consent, while the other formally served summonses. Papers extended first to Knox, then Dad official notices requiring immediate attendance for investigative interview regarding alleged signature falsification and unauthorized asset disposal. Tegan dissolved into open sobbing, clutching Knox's sleeve while pleading with officers that misunderstandings could resolve privately among relatives. Mom's legs gave way slightly. She sank deeper into her seat, face buried in hands as quiet sobs escaped. Dad accepted service mechanically, eyes fixed downward. Knox stared at the summons, blankly whispering fragmented apologies about desperation driving poor choices. I waited until the officers completed protocol before speaking. My voice emerged even stripped of earlier pretense. I stated plainly they had prioritized preserving their lifestyle over my entrusted future, electing to liquidate what was never theirs to spend. Consequences now followed inevitably without intervention or leniency from me. Officers advised retaining counsel promptly, noting proceedings would advance through proper channels. They departed courteously, leaving copies and contact information. Heavy quiet descended again. Holiday music from a distant speaker felt absurdly out of place. Mom extended a trembling hand across the table, murmuring broken appeals for dialogue for family healing despite errors. Dad echoed faintly, referencing pressures that clouded judgment during financial crisis. Tegan continued crying, questioning how protection morphed into this irreversible damage. Knox remained mute, head bowed in apparent defeat. Grandpa gathered scattered pages methodically. Mr. Hodges secured materials, offering measured closure remarks. I reiterated the decision rested entirely with them years ago. Mercy required remorse genuine enough to undo harm impossible here. No further words passed. The evening dissolved into fractured aftermath bonds severed beyond repair. Dish. The officers stepped out into the chilly Texas night, summons papers left behind like final notices. A full year passed in a grind of legal proceedings that tested every bit of resolve I had built up. The civil lawsuit dragged through depositions, discovery phases, and multiple court appearances in downtown Houston, where I sat for hours under fluorescent lights, answering questions about timelines I already knew by heart. Nights blurred into anxious reviews of affidavits and expert reports. Sleep fractured by worries over whether the forensic evidence would hold up against defenses claiming good faith or clerical mistakes. David Carter's legal team argued successfully that he purchased in reasonable belief a valid title, reducing the recoverable amount to partial restitution rather than full company value. Settlement eventually came enough to provide a foundation, but far short of restoring everything lost in opportunity and growth over those stolen years. The judge's order enforced payment through structured installments monitored closely to prevent evasion. My former family's world unraveled steadily. Dad's construction business folded under combined weight of existing debts and new legal fees, forcing Chapter 7 liquidation that wiped out equipment contracts and reputation built over decades. Mom and Dad sold the family home in the suburbs, a place filled with childhood memories, now tainted to cover mounting obligations, downsizing to a modest rental apartment on the edge of town where holiday decorations no longer appeared. Knox faced separate consequences from the fraud investigation. Probation terms and restitution orders strained his finances further. Tegan filed for divorce midway through the process, citing irreconcilable differences rooted in the fallout. She moved back to her hometown, seeking distance from the scandal that affected her professional network. I redirected every dollar of the settlement into launching a smaller logistics venture focused on mini cold storage units for local producers, farmers, markets, small food distributors, restaurants needing flexible overflow space around the greater Houston area. Early months proved brutal. Securing initial clients required cold calls, trade show booths, and discounted rates to build trust. Capital stretched thin, covering warehouse leases and refrigerated trailer purchases, payroll delays, testing loyalty of the few employees I hired. Cash flow stabilized gradually through persistent networking at industry events and reliable service delivery. Repeat contracts emerged from satisfied partners referring others, inventory turnover improving month by month. Grandpa Sidney relocated to a comfortable condo nearby, offering informal advice drawn from his long career supplier, negotiations route, optimization risk assessment that proved invaluable without overstepping. He joined occasional site visits, pride evident as operations expanded from one facility to leased satellite locations serving surrounding counties. Contact with my parents and brother ceased entirely. Blocked numbers prevented direct outreach, though occasional messages from Mom arrived via mutual acquaintances, brief apologies expressing regret, and hopes for eventual reconciliation. I deleted them, unread, recognizing patterns of manipulation beneath surface remorse. Healing required boundaries, not reopened wounds. Professional milestones accumulated quietly: first profitable quarter employee retention bonuses, positive reviews from clients valuing personalized service, absent in larger competitors. Personal routines settled into rhythm: early warehouse checks, evening paperwork, weekend downtime, reading industry journals or walking local trails to clear thoughts. Grandpa's presence provided steady companionship: shared meals, discussing market trends, quiet evenings watching games, his encouragement reinforcing choices made. Financial independence grew: tangible accounts reflecting hard-earned progress rather than dependence or deceit. The betrayal's shadow lingered in moments of doubt, but forward momentum overshadowed it increasingly. Business licenses renewed smoothly, insurance policies updated, small team gatherings marking achievements like new vehicle additions. Community ties strengthened through Chamber of Commerce, involvement sponsorships of local events, supporting Texas agriculture. Grandpa's health remained robust, his insights sharpening strategies amid fluctuating fuel costs and supply chain shifts. Isolation from blood relatives evolved into chosen solitude: peace derived from self-reliance. Reflections on that Christmas night surfaced rarely, serving as reminder rather than regret. Growth continued incrementally. Additional refrigerated units expanded. Driver roster diversified, client base, reducing single-point risks. Stability felt earned, foundations solid against future uncertainties. Grandpa often remarked on resilience, displayed satisfaction, evident in observing the enterprise thrive under my direction. Life reshaped around authenticity, free from inherited toxicity. From the small office of my new logistics company in Texas, I started posting my story anonymously on an online forum dedicated to people who had been financially exploited by relatives. The thread gained traction quietly at first views, ticking up a few sympathetic replies, trickling in from strangers dealing with similar inheritance disputes or sibling fraud. One evening, after closing the warehouse, I noticed a private message from a young woman in her mid-20s living in Oklahoma. She described how her older brother had quietly transferred family farmland left to her by their late grandmother into his name, using forged documents while she was away at nursing school. We exchanged several messages over the following weeks. I shared resources I had gathered during my own case names of pro bono legal aid organizations, in her state templates for filing complaints with the county clerk, tips on gathering bank records without alerting the perpetrator. She kept me updated on every step: the initial consultation, filing the civil suit for fraudulent conveyance, attending mediation sessions that went nowhere. I stayed up late responding, offering encouragement when depositions shook her confidence. The case concluded in her favor after months of back and forth. The judge ordered title restoration and compensatory damages. She mailed me a handwritten letter on simple stationery pages, filled with gratitude for the guidance that turned overwhelming fear into actionable steps. Similar outreach followed gradually. A man from Colorado contacted me about his parents redirecting trust distributions meant for his education. A sister in Florida described an aunt liquidating shared investment accounts without consent. I carved out weekend hours for virtual consultations, reviewing documents they uploaded securely, suggesting questions for their attorneys, explaining Texas-specific precedents that sometimes influenced multi-state cases. No fees ever exchanged hands. Satisfaction came from watching patterns I recognized shift toward resolution, confused victims gaining clarity, taking control instead of remaining paralyzed. Grandpa Sidney became a regular visitor to the office. He would arrive mid-morning with coffee from the local diner, settling into the extra chair while I handled invoices or route planning. Conversations often drifted to reflections on justice. He acknowledged the path proved far rockier than initial righteous anger suggested, endless paperwork, delayed hearings, partial recoveries rather than complete restoration. Yet he emphasized growth observed in my handling of setbacks, decisions grounded in experience rather than reaction. Pride surfaced in his tone when discussing client expansions or employee milestones. Christmas evolved in meaning entirely. Decorations appeared sparingly, a small tree on the reception desk, lights along the warehouse entrance for staff appreciation. The date no longer evoked forced gatherings or hidden agendas, serving instead as annual reminder to prioritize self-preservation. I viewed family through clearer lens now, connection earned through consistent respect, not assumed via bloodline. Forgiveness remained possible but only toward demonstrated change, not repeated harm. Betrayal's sting dulled over time, replaced by purpose, derived from assisting others navigate similar darkness. Each success story reinforced the choice to sever toxic ties, allowing space for healthier relationships built on mutual trust. Grandpa frequently noted how the ordeal forged resilience unimaginable before. Quiet satisfaction accompanied watching the business thrive on integrity free from past shadows. The lesson settled: deep kinship carries no automatic entitlement to loyalty. Protection begins internally, boundaries essential against those proven unwilling to honor them. Cutting contact wasn't cruelty, it enabled survival, growth, eventual contribution beyond personal pain. Life continued forward, grounded in choices that aligned with hard-won values. Peace arrived not from reconciliation, but acceptance of reality and commitment to different standards. Helping others emerged as quiet redemption, transforming private wounds into shared strength. Grandpa's presence anchored daily routine, his wisdom complementing operational demands. The company expanded steadily, additional refrigerated units, broader delivery radius covering Central Texas corridors. Community involvement grew naturally, sponsoring local food bank drives, partnering with small farms for reliable cold chain needs. Personal fulfillment stemmed from independence, achieved purpose, discovered in supporting vulnerable individuals facing familial deception. Reflection brought clarity. Blood relation guarantees nothing. Character defines worthiness. The forgiveness withheld from unrepentant betrayers protected future well-being. Moving forward meant embracing self-reliance, offering aid, selectively living authentically. The journey, though painful, yielded maturity and direction unforeseen. Grandpa summed it best during one coffee break. Justice sometimes arrives incomplete, but personal evolution completes the victory. That perspective guided everything now: business decisions, outreach efforts, daily outlook. Christmas marked renewal, not loss, a day reinforcing vigilance and gratitude for chosen paths. The core truth remained private yet profound: family earns its place. Absence of toxicity creates room for genuine connection. Life rebuilt on solid terms carried forward with quiet confidence.